Okay, and we're on. Okay, so hey everybody, welcome to the show. I'm Jeff,
And I'm Liz.
and this is another episode of Random Tan Experience. So if you guys have been watching the show all year this year, you'll know that we've been having a bunch of technical difficulties and trying to work through a whole bunch of stuff. So we're going with a little bit of a different format tonight, and hopefully it works out, and hopefully it's going to be a little bit less glitchy. So we'll find out. We'll find out as the night progresses and stuff. And so if you guys are watching this, hopefully you're gonna have a nice clean non-technically issue-y show. Right, so but if this is your first time joining us, a little bit of an introduction. We are parents of 9.
Yeah.
We homeschool.
And we're work from home entrepreneurs.
Yeah, so we're home full time, and
Except when we're out.
Except when we're out, and we do that a lot, because we like to do a lot of things with other homeschool families and other homeschool groups, and that's kind of one of the fun things about homeschooling, is because it gives us a lot of flexibility, in our schedule and things, different things that we can do. So, but tonight we are going to revisit a topic that we did earlier, but it was
a very glitchy episode.
It was a very glitchy episode, and I know a lot of people wanted to hear the topic, and I wanted a little bit less glitchy, but there's a lot of people who who said that they wanted to hear the topic again. So we're talking about teen dating tonight, and our position, our thoughts and philosophies, and a little bit of reasoning why behind what our philosophies are on teen dating. Okay, so first of all, just to start off, though, we wanted to start off with a definition of dating, because a lot of people have different definitions of what a date actually is. Some people, for some people, hanging out is a date. For some people, it's a little bit different than that. So we are defining dating as
that sort of exclusivity that you have when you choose one person that you're going to date, and that's the one you're going to commit to.
That's right. So an exclusive commitment, and yeah. So that's what we are defining as dating, and our philosophy has always been that the purpose of dating is to basically discern whether or not this person that you're with is going to be your spouse. Mm-hmm. If this is the person that you're going to spend the rest of your life with. And that's really what the purpose of dating is.
Because you're investing a lot of emotional energy, a lot of yourself, and if you're only investing yourself in order to have that bond broken and then have to try and rebuild yourself, it's not fruitful to just go on doing that serially over and over again. It's really for a purpose of finding the one long term that you're gonna work with.
And I think that our society today has really kind of normalized that that heartbreak that can happen, that happens. You date and you break up, you date, you break up, you date, you break up. So this idea of non-permanence in relationships is already kind of promulgated by dating, by the culture's sort of definition of what dating is. Mm-hmm. And so, and even more so, because the emotions and the hormones and everything of teenage life, everything is,
there's a whole stage of development going on at the same time.
Yeah. So the part of the beauty of teenagehood, actually I should move back and say, the conversations that we've had with our kids, and what we've all told our kids is that dating should start after 18. Okay, so I've always said that dating should start after 18, and we've had really good, mature conversations with our kids, about that. But the reasoning for that is because you're in a period of huge formation when you're a teenager, right? And what's happening is you're developing a self construct, your self construct, who you are. And a lot of times what'll happen is when you start dating somebody, when people start dating in the teenage years, your emotional growth stops, at the age that you begin to
form those attachments.
And then your whole self-construct, begins to develop around being the significant other of that other person. And then what happens to a lot of high school sweethearts when they get to university is they'll break up, and then all of a sudden you have maybe 19, 20-year-old person who is now at a 15, 16-year-old emotional development level when it comes to relationships. And this is why you see a lot of people when they get to university or when they get to college and they break up with their high school sweethearts, along with a lot of other factors, kind of just go crazy. It's like letting the snake out of the can, the spring loose, so to speak, right? So so part of what we wanted to pass on to our kids was making sure that in their teenage years, they really developed a strong sense of self. They really developed a strong sense of self-worth. They learned to identify their strengths.
Without that self-worth being tied up in the approval from one person in particular, so that they don't rely on the external all the time. They can rely on their own internal self-worth.
Right. So, and then once you have that, because you can't give what you don't got, right? You can't give what you don't got. And so, part of being, part of being a good spouse in the future, what we're trying to tell our kids anyway, is to make sure that, as best as you can, to be the best person that you can be, and how do you do that? Well, you got to discover, that person that, the best that you can be. It's a constant discovery, right? But especially in your teenage years, see what, learn to recognize your internal strength, to recognize your internal strength. What are you going to?
Yeah, there's also, there's a lot of studies being done on the teenage brain as well. So as they're going through that sort of high hormonally induced phase of development, the brain is actually going through a phase of proliferation where it's actually growing more connections. They used to think that once brain development sort of tapered off in childhood, that the brain was fully formed, and they didn't actually really go back and study brain development in later years for I guess until the last 20 years or so. And they've really started to look at the teenage brain again, and what they've discovered is that as an infant, brain growth proliferates, and then it trims back to what's being used. So it proliferates, grows, and then it waits to see which pathways and which neural synapses are being used the most, and it trims back the excess stuff. That actually happens again. That process gets repeated once the hormones of puberty kick in. That brain growth happens again, and that trimming process happens again in later adolescence as the brain starts to realize, okay, this is the pathway that I need. These are the neurons I need to connect. And what happens is if you're in that phase, one of the effects on the brain is actually there's a lack of decision making or risk assessment that happens in the prefrontal cortex. So very often teenagers in that stage don't assess risk accurately. They don't think about what's going to happen. They need someone to mirror for them. Okay, so if you're in the situation, let's talk it out. What would you do? What would be the next step? And how would you do that safely? And how would you get from this situation that might be dangerous into a safe environment? And so when all of that is happening at the same time as those connections are being formed, it's really, that's one of the reasons it's really key that that formation is happening while you're secure and not necessarily entrenched in someone else's growth and development who's going through the same shifting. You want to make sure you've got a solid footing before you try and, when you're building a bridge, you make sure both foundations are strong. You don't sort of say, oh, okay, well, let's reach out, from two sides and we'll try and figure out the foundations later. The foundations come first.
Yeah. And, I think it's funny, there's a couple of things that I want to, to bring up too, but as parents, especially in today's world, with the, with the way social media is and with the way, the internet is, and it's actually scary what some of the expectations are, when it comes to dating, in the I'm going to say the secular sense of the word, and sometimes, I mean, we're pretty laid back as parents, and sometimes though, you can fall into the trap of saying, oh, you know what, they're just kids, and it was we were kids once too, and everything like that. Now, I'm not saying to become a helicopter parent or crazy crazy about it, right? But we have to be aware of the dangers there are really in this in this time. And so it's these healthy conversations are really important to have with our kids. One of the things that we've encouraged, I encouraged it to when I was a youth minister, and I talk about relationships to my to my teens and my youth group, and then now even to our teens now that we have teens, is to make a list of the kind of person you would want to spend the rest of your life with, that you could see spending the rest of your life with, and what are the qualities and characteristics of this person, and and as you go through this list, and it's part of a bigger exercise that I do with them about where do you see yourself 5 years, 10 years from now? What's the life that you want to be living, and who do you want to be spending it with? What's the what is the kind of person that you want to be spending it with? Because then it leads to the question, well, what kind of person is your dream person going to be attracted to? And that leads you to a process of self-discovery to becoming your best self, right? So, to become your best self, to be the kind of person that your, that your spouse, would be attracted to. The way that I put it, or my prayer every day is, to be the husband that God intended, for Liz, right? So before, it was to be the husband that God intended for my wife, right? And to pray and discern, to lead us closer to that, And we're actually living examples of the whole list, right? Like of the whole,
Yeah, I actually made a list as a teenager before I really started making lists with a really purposeful intention behind it. But I just, I was mid-teens, and I thought, okay, what would I want? I want a guy who's, I made a list of 10 or 15 qualities, characteristics, ideas of what I wanted in a guy, and wrote it all down, and then I put it away somewhere, and I didn't really think about it again for a long time, but I'd made the list, so it was somewhere in my subconscious. And it wasn't until after we'd been dating for a while, and I came across that idea. I thought, oh yeah, I did that once, and I went through that list in my head, and I thought, yeah, actually, like, he ticks off this one and this one and the next one and the other, and yeah, he matches everything on my list. And so even just having done that exercise, primes you to be able, just as you're going about, you're not necessarily holding up a checklist to every person you see and evaluating, do you meet this criteria, this criteria, this criteria? But when you've got that sort of framework in the back of your mind, you can recognize, once you've identified it, okay, yeah, no, this is not someone who's gonna measure up, or this is someone I could see myself with. It gives you that sort of underlying framework that just becomes the fabric that you work with.
And one of the things that we really like to talk to our kids about, not is the idea of vocation. Like, I think that this idea of the vocation of marriage, is something that is, it's not really understood well in our in our in sort of the secular world, but the idea that marriage is a life that you're called to, and that you are called to, you are called, to this, to this holy, lifestyle, to be, to participate in the creation of, of your kids, and to live sacramentally as, as a married couple. I mean, like, this whole, like, all of these ideas and concepts, they're not really well understood. Well, for sure, they're not understood by the, by the masses, and even, I think a lot of people tend, it's a very compartmentalized world. We have, like, we have our religious life, and then we have our work life, and then we have our, our home life, and all of this stuff. But really, how can, you're the same person, right? Mm-hmm. So how can, you have your home self and your work self and your spiritual self? It's got to be the whole. You
integrated,
integrated into your whole being, mm-hmm. right? So, who I am, is defined by my vocation. So I'm a husband first. I'm a husband first because, what I do is just my job, and what I do, well, it changes from time to time. I mean, I was a youth minister at one point, I was a teacher at another point, and now we're, entrepreneurs, right? So, I mean, like, we've changed, as our life path and, as our seasons has changed. But what has stayed constant has been our vocation.
Mm-hmm.
Our vocation.
The state in which you live.
Yeah.
All of the things that you do.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. So that's kind of where, right. That's pretty much where. That's sort of what our, our thoughts are when people ask us about, what we think about teen dating. Now, I did want to share this story to show you guys how, because I said that I've mellowed out quite a bit, because I used to have this whole thing planned out, even before we had kids. So before we even started dating, right? I had this whole vision of how I was going to be as a dad, especially, as a dad with daughters. And, we happen to have, 4 out of so we have 5 boys, 4 beautiful daughters. And, and so this was the story. This was my whole plan for, years and years and years. What would happen is, if they brought a boy to the house, they would have to go in through the side door, right? Well,
not the front door.
Not the front door, right? But in our case now, they'd have to go through the garage, right? So they'd go into the garage, and and I'd have a little room prepared, right? And a little room prepared with a condo-sized couch on one side. And if you guys don't know what a condo-sized couch is, about 3/4 the size of a full-size couch. But I would saw the front legs of the couch. I'd saw about maybe about an inch off the front legs of the couch, so you kind of be sitting forward like this. It's not very comfortable. And then what I would do, and on the opposite side of the couch would be my samurai sword, okay, with the track lighting just shining, on the blade, like ping, right, like just kind of making that blade, just gleam. And underneath the sword would be my big wingback chair, and I would walk in and introduce myself, and we'd have a little chat. I'd walk in with our Irish wolfhounds. Yeah, we really wanted to get Irish. Well, this was before we realized
before we had kids with allergies.
Yeah, so we have a couple of kids with that. Anyway, so and then if they made it to dinner, we would serve chicken. And we would serve chicken, and as I would, serve the chicken, carve the chicken, I'd say, "So, Joe, do you prefer leg or breast? And if they didn't say wing, he was out of there, right? So, crazy Asian dad, right? So I was like, all ready to go crazy Asian dad. So, I'm glad to say that to the relief of my daughters are relieved, that I've mellowed out. I've mellowed out a little bit, over the years. But, I still might pull out that samurai sword one day. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway. But it is getting up to the top of the hour. So hopefully, hopefully you guys had enjoyed the show. Hopefully it was less glitchy. Hopefully it's smoother this time. And we'd love to hear what you guys think. Our email address is randomtanexperience@gmail.com. randomtanexperience@gmail.com. And we'll see you guys next week. I don't know what we're talking about next week. It's something random. All right, something random. Okay. So we'll see you guys. Have a good night.
Have a great week.